called Critical Race Today, A Global Look. My role, if you were here last time, my role is basically to be the moderator and to let the people who are specialists in this area have the floor as much as possible. Now, a few announcements. First of all, just to give you a sense of how we're going to time this now that we're going to actual lecture mode. The lectures, we have a full 75 minutes. That is ours, that no one can take away. And perhaps occasionally an additional 15 minutes if excitement brews in the discussion. So the way we're going to organize it is the speaker will have about 40 minutes to speak. That will give us a good half hour plus to have a conversation. And so today's speaker, Giovanni, will speak for about 40 minutes. If it looks like he's going to go over that, I have the very unpleasant responsibility of sending him a private chat, which I really don't want to do, but I doubt that I will have to. Now, a couple of other things that we want to announce. We want to really encourage you, whether you are a student, faculty, staff, or anybody else, we really want to encourage you, as thoughts occur to you, to post them in the chat. And as questions occur to you, to put them in the chat. Last summer, when we did something vaguely like this, that was one of the great highlights of this forum. That is, throughout the forum, throughout people's talks, those of you in the audience would post questions, would post comments, and other people in the audience would respond to them. And because I'm the moderator, I had to look at that. And I was really impressed by the level of conversation. Only occasionally did somebody post something that I was not particularly impressed by. Usually these were very interesting and stimulating comments, and they augmented the whole process tremendously. When we talked about how it worked after the fact, that was one thing I pointed out, that it was something I did not expect because I haven't done any teaching on Zoom, and that I was really pleased by. So feel free, feel encouraged, because the last thing we want in this forum is a tiki Zoom. We want people at quiet Zoom. We want to have a very, very active Zoom. So be encouraged with that. Now, a couple of other things. I'm going to engage in a one-time act of direct democracy. I haven't told John I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. Direct democracy, of course, means that everybody gets to vote. And then when I see what people want, I decide what to do. So would you appreciate it if the members of this forum, the 4 members of this forum, were to post some, what I would call complimentary readings for you to consult or not consult as you wish, if you want to go deeper into some of the things they're talking about. If you think that's something you would like, this is where I fail in technology. Vinny, how should I let them inform me?
We can do the
raise hand.
Hand raise.
Oh yeah, raise your hand if you think that's a good idea.
Your electronic hand?
Or
any hand you wish to raise. I don't know. Lots of hands are going up. Okay, so 15 raised hands, 16, 17. Oh, I hate to be. So 17 people, 17 said they thought it would be. That's a large enough number for me.
8 hands and 1 thumbs up. So
okay.
Okay.
That's my definition of a majority.
That's right. So and your hands will stay up unless you lower them.
Yes, and Vinny knows how to do things with those hands that I don't want to describe. So so This is entirely up to the speakers to post as they wish, but typically speakers are happy to have people do additional reading because, as you know, they're very much into these topics themselves, otherwise they wouldn't be doing them. And they are happy when other people are into it as well. So I will leave it up to the speakers to post as they see fit. And I will leave it up to the audience to read as you see fit. Okay, does that make sense, John? Now, there is yet another innovation that we're going to do. This was the subject of very heated discussion on email the last couple of days. And this was proposed by both John and Polly. And that is to make it possible for those who wish to receive what is going to be called a global critical race certificate. For those of you who want that as an additional document showing that you not only participated in this, but that you have developed a certain degree of knowledge and even expertise in it. Now, it does require you to do some additional work, but I'm going to ask John to describe it because I'll just end up reading what he sent me.
Yes, it doesn't, it's basically the basic requirements are to attend this lecture series, which obviously you're already doing because you're here, but to continue to attend this lecture series of 4 talks. So it's Tuesdays and Thursdays at this exact time, this weekend, next week. And the only additional thing is we won't require, anything that's like a course paper, but we do want to hear something of your reactions or opinions or thoughts or discussion on some of topics that are touched upon here. And we think the best way to do that is really in the form of more like a post than a paper. So posts can be very short and they're quite informal in style, and they don't get corrected and they don't get graded. But they get circulated. And the way we will do that, we'll let you know about that. We'll probably use the NYI social, what we're calling the social network. There are many social networks. We mean the one that you've gotten links to called NYI Social, the one created by Omer Preminger on his server that in the information center, there's a link to it. And we will, inside there, we will create a separate space just for this series, the Critical Race, A Global Look series. And all you have to do is make one post there at any time during the 2-week period. And you're done with the requirements for it. But we think that that will generate some kind of discussion in addition to what goes on during the talks.
Okay.
That's it. That is it. And you got an email about it just a few minutes ago, I believe. You can check it later. And I'm also putting the link to the sign-up form for it right now in the chat box right here. Don't do it now. It's just your name and a little information. That's it. And of course, you do not have to do this, and you do not have to do this to attend these lectures. You're welcome to attend these lectures regardless.
Okay.
That's it. That's all I have.
So John, one quick question of this. Are they going to get feedback from their posts other than the sort of feedback you normally get when you post something?
Well, we were hoping it would be that kind of, it would be a naturally occurring phenomenon and not, a faculty member telling you,
right,
evaluating you, because that's not what this is about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Naturally occurring phenomenon on Zoom. That's an interesting image. I won't pursue it, however. Okay. So those are the announcements for today. Undoubtedly, there'll be announcements of one kind or another before each one. But the main thing is, and the thing that spurred all of this is, it really does constitute what might be called value added when there is ongoing dialogue during the presentation on the chat mechanism. Anyway, so today we have a speaker who is one of the main organizers of this. He is Giovanni Picker, and I'm going to read the biography that Giovanni sent me and then add a couple of other things because I looked at his homepage. Giovanni Picker is a sociologist and an urbanist, an assistant professor of sociology at the University of Glasgow. His work looks at the relations between race, colonialism, and cities. His empirical focus is on Europe, and theoretically, he feels at home with race-critical theories, global and historical sociology, and ethnographic theories. His first monograph was entitled Racial Cities, Governance and the Segregation of Romani People in Urban Europe. And he is currently working on a second one entitled Planning White Europe, on urban planning and whiteness. So this is very, very central to what we were talking about, because this whole issue of whiteness, which is a profoundly central question in American political discourse, he is arguing, I suspect, correct me if I'm wrong, that it is not just within American discourse that this plays such a major role. Now, if you go onto his bio online, you see that he has been all sorts of places in his very young life, including Romania. He got his degree from Milan, and he spent some time at the Higher School of Economics, Vishka, if I'm not mistaken. So he's done lots and lots of things. I will now hand it over to him. He will do two things. First of all, he'll give a sort of 5-minute discussion of where we are based upon what happened last Thursday, and then he will give his talk. The title of his talk is Modernity, Urbanity, and the Race Taboo in Europe. So Giovanni, everybody else, please go to mute. We'll go to speaker view.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary, for your very complete, comprehensive, and generous introduction, especially the very young life, I have to say. I was very pleased to hear that. Sometimes I doubt that's true, but okay. I'm again very pleased to be back here. I was here last week for the introduction, and as Gary said, I would like to very briefly synthesize what we discussed last time with the talk by Jalide and myself to introduce this 4-lecture series. So we talked about mainly two things. One is the importance of critical race theory today in times where the Trump administration just finished, and the legacy of it is still ongoing and will be ongoing for probably a long time, in which nationalism is rampant and authoritarian neoliberalism as well in places such as many countries across the West, but and beyond, and in which we feel the need to go back to history and to have a historical perspective on what's going on today, something that cannot be reduced to just simply classical economic relations and what we have learned from classical political economy, for example. The second thing that we discussed is the importance to combine material and representational registers in our understanding of these 4 lectures. Critical race theory and race in general, approach from a critical perspective, invites us to think relationally and keep in focus always the representational and the material dimensions of what we are discussing in relation with each other, to each other. So it is very important that across the 4 lectures that span across very different regions of the world and topics, the material and the representational should be kept together. The representational means the metaphorical, the symbolic, and everything that is not concretely reducible to the materiality. And then finally, we also invited all students, and I would like to reiterate this invitation here, to find your own synthesis across the 4 lectures. We all talk about race and critical race and the importance to foreground race in global issues today, but we talk, as I said, about different things. So it's up to you, and I would like to also to say your task to find the threads across the 4 lectures, okay, to find the synthesis, your own personal critical synthesis across the 4 lectures. So with this in mind, I would start with today's topic, which, as Gary said, is modernity, urbanity, and the race taboo in Europe. And I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I should move a bit closer to the mic. Thank you for letting me know, John.
There's some kind of background noise. I don't know if other people are having trouble.
It's probably. Sorry,
it's when it may be the movement.
Exactly.
You know, yeah.
My hands are moving fast. Okay.
Thanks.
So I hope now it's better. I will try to hold the mic like that. So first of all, I would like to say one word, very brief, about why I'm interested in this topic. Where am I? Where I start from? Where I talk from? And what from my biography is important at this topic. So I grew up in a neighborhood that is the Milan Central Station neighborhood. And the reason why I started to be interested in race and cities is because while growing up in the 90s, I witnessed a very strong transformation of this social space of the Central Station. So first of all, the Central Station was constructed by Mussolini in 1931 at the occurrence of Hitler's visit to Milan. So in order to welcome Hitler to Milan, and one of the rooms of the Central Station was, and on the pavement, there are swastikas, as you can see here, still there. And it's called the Regal Room, where actually Mussolini and Hitler met officially. But in the 90s, the social space of the station was a space of homelessness, of abandonment. The state was withdrawing from urban governance and leaving poverty to itself, as you can see on the left-hand screen here. What happened throughout the 2000s, 2010s is a radical change. The state was harshly intervening in disciplining this social space, as you can see on the right hand of the screen, with massive police forces checking and stopping and searching people standing there. And also the color of the skin of the people changed there, as you can see. Okay, so here you are, people from the African continent seeking asylum or even seeking just better life conditions in one of the G8 countries, and being constantly monitored, stopped and searched by the police. And this is a quotidian scene you can see even today, probably in Milan Central Station. So this rapid change or steadily change got me interested in class, race, and urban governance in cities. The last point is that from the station, over 1,000 Jews got deported in 1944. And today there is a memorial of the Shoah exactly on the station, on the track that was used to deport the Jews from fascist Italy, occupied Nazi Italy, to Auschwitz and camps across Poland and Germany. So the global racial history and urban governance were very much coming together in the social space where I was growing up. So that's why my interest in this stuff. So, okay, I would like to structure my lecture today in 3 parts, and then leaving our 3 parts for question and discussion, and a little activity I would like you to do in breakout rooms. So the first part will be looking at urban modernity and urban renaissance in Western Europe. The second part on colonialism and the changed dominant conceptions of urbanity and humanity. And third, the contemporary Western European cities and the race taboo. A little premise today. is that I just received the book cover of a forthcoming book edited by my unbelievably great colleague Noah Ha and myself, which is coming out in 2022 by Manchester University Press, called Knowing European Cities, Modernity, Race and Colonialism, which aims to radically critique and question contemporary social theories and social history of European cities that ignore colonialism and race, as we are seeing today in my talk. So I'm grateful to my colleague Noah Ha for the inspiration that provided also for this talk. Okay, so modernity is a generic signifier which indexes ideas such as progress, advancement, reason, enlightenment, and development, a process which usually identified usually as starting in Western Europe in the 15th century and stretching at least through the 20th century. This understanding of modernity is Eurocentric because colonialism, which has been the longest lasting and most global political and economic project of modernity, can be considered to be related to progress, development, reason, advancement only by Europeans, who were the colonizers. And that's why modernity in the title of this talk is between brackets. Reference to these ideas go to the colonial scholarship like Enrique Dussel, Walter Mignolo, Arturo Escobar, and others. As various historians and social scientists have shown, the spatial form par excellence of modernity, in brackets, is the city. Walter Benjamin's studies of Paris, for example, show this very well. And recently, Jennifer Robinson and Michael Keith, among others, have built on Benjamin's intuitions to show their endurance and heuristic validity for the 21st century. The city may be viewed as the quintessential spatial form of modernity at both the level of representations and the level of materiality, as I was saying at the beginning when I was talking about last week's talk. At the level of representations, urbanity, as we understand the notion today, is synonym to advancement, reason, progress, and development, as opposed to rurality, which by contrast indexes backwardness and unreason. Urbanity is Gesellschaft, rurality is Gemeinschaft, Antoni's 1887 essay. These three photos here show this very well. One is Harvey Willie Corbett's visionary plans for New York City on different levels, 1928. The other is The Radiant City by Le Corbusier, a manifesto of modernist urbanism. And the third is the arcades in Paris that were the objects of one of Walter Benjamin's most notable projects, the arcades. At the level of materiality, instead, Western European cities which were involved in colonial trades expanded in population and wealth since the beginning of the colonial trade exponentially more than those cities which were not directly involved in colonial trade. Evidence of that comes from Acemoglu and colleagues' 2005 eloquent essay, which shows that urbanization trends in Western Europe since the late 15th century are quite explicit. But what do they mean? Western European cities which were directly involved in the Atlantic trade were the locations where wealth was mostly concentrated. And this wealth indeed attracted labor force and business, which made the urban population swell. In turn, more people meant more potential taxpayers. So the wealth of the private business and traders became by proxy the wealth of the city and city rulers and city governors and so on. And you can see that this process exponentially increases since the early 16th century in cities where Atlantic traders were residing, as opposed to cities where Atlantic traders were not residing. And the trends of the latter pretty much follows the trends of Eastern European cities that were Eastern Europe, which was not, although recent research has questioned this, involved in colonial projects. Therefore, we can say that modernity, Western European cities, and colonialism are intrinsically part of the same global process which was made as much of representations as of materiality, the two dimensions always in conversation with each other, or to borrow from Stuart Hall, organized in mutual articulations. What this means is that along with the material process of increasing wealth concentration in Western European cities, which were directly involved in colonial trade, the very dominant idea of the city, which had been circulating in the West, has gradually transformed due to colonialism. Why is that? What happened, and what does it have to do with race and its tabooization, as the title of my talk suggests? To answer these questions, we should look at the dominant conceptions of urbanity circulating before the early 16th century, and to understand the impact of colonialism on those conceptions. The Middle Ages marked the beginning of this process. Western European towns and cities became more and more autonomous from larger feudal powers, thanks to the strengthening of trade across the Mediterranean, which was, never forget, based on the enslavement of people from Eastern Europe, and especially the shipment of these slaves to sultans in northern African countries. And the emergence of guilds as well in Western European cities in the Middle Ages as a cause of autonomy. Parallel to the increase in material wealth and power, medieval cities also became imagined and represented as the sites of order, civilization, and reason. Opposed to that was the realm of unreason and disorder, symbolized by dark, monstrous, and animal-like figures hunting the purity of the city. And here is an example by the wonderful 2018 book by Geraldine Heng, The Invention of Race in the European Middle Ages. Heng shows that the Hereford Mappa Mundi, which is one of the first maps of Europe, because that was the only part of the world which was known, shows that there were the world is shown as a web of cities, outside of which, and never inside of them, there are monstrous figures. Okay, so the quality of the sound is not great. I can try and do it without earphones. Is that any better now? Is that any better? Okay, thanks. I'll try to be very careful with them. Thanks for letting me know, John. Gary. With a period called the Renaissance, Western European cities became even more objects of representations, and along with celebratory tones about them, they became also objects of desire. Here are three examples. Evidence of this is that a number of paintings of the ideal city started circulating in mid-15th century Western Europe. They invoked the need for social reformation and social change. Indeed, the city in this period in Western Europe became a discursive proxy for society. You say city, you mean society. So here you have the ideal city of Baltimore in 1480s. The period of these three examples of ideal cities is the same, more or less, 1480s, 1470s. But they are three different examples of three different painters, whom we don't know who they were, but we know more or less the circles of artists and intellectuals they were involved in. But they show very clearly that for the first time, the city becomes, the object of a projection of what the good society would look like. And the perfection of the geometric measures, the perfection of the geometry shows that the city was imagined and desired as the realm of purity, as opposed to disorder and unreason. So let me summarize the main points so far. Just before colonialism started and all across the 16th century, ideas and ideals of cities were circulating in Western Europe. This shows that the very notion of cities as proxies of societies became common sense. So the idea was that for reforming society, one should think of reforming the city. Is evidence of this novelty considered the experiments in imagining and designing ideal cities that mushroomed between the 15th and 16th century. These are three other examples: Sforzinda in Italy, Dürer's model town in the Netherlands, and Freudenstadt in Germany. These designs show that in Western Europe at that time, the city became for the first time an imaginative object upon which reformist desires and aspirations for social change were getting projected. So my question in this kind of context is, what impact did Columbus' voyages have on these 15th and 16th century social ideals and desires? What happened, in other words, upon the beginning of colonialism to the dominant conception of urbanity? And here I come to the second step of my talk. One main clue seemed to me, so first of all, sorry, this is a very big question, a question which lays at the center of a number of projects that I'm carrying out these days. But I would like here to offer just some clues which seem to me important for arriving at a satisfactory answer. So one main clue, it seems to me, come from Thomas More's famous book, Utopia, which means nowhere in Latin, published in Basel in 1517. This is a fictional but profoundly programmatic book which was highly influential at that time. It describes an ideal land, an island, where private property is banned and harmony and peace rule. While the ideal land is home to 54 cities, one of Utopia's protagonists, Hyclode, in describing the island, describes just the capital, Amaraud, a proxy for Utopia's societies. So, albeit an island, an ideal island, Utopia is often being described as an ideal city. What is important for our discussion here is that Thomas More directly draws on depictions of the so-called New World, that is the just occupied lands of today's Caribbean and Mexico, and especially depictions of those lands offered by Amerigo Vespucci, the Italian traveler who More actually mentions in the book, and whose first name, Amerigo, provided a blueprint for calling those lands Americas. So according to, for example, Alfred Cave, Utopia is modeled from the first colonial occupations, and especially given More's intention to exterminate all those who did not comply with Utopia's rules. The story of Utopia seems to be essentially based on colonial violence. This empirical clue tells us that in the early 16th century Western Europe, urbanity seemed to become idealized and as an exclusive and superior civilized and colonial form of living together, where peace and harmony were necessarily predicated upon the exclusion, and in Thomas More's view, extermination of those who don't meet the standard of urban civilization. Indeed, the three ideal cities I showed earlier, Sforzinda's, Dürer's models, and Freudenstadt, are all fortress cities. This shows that the ideal cities of the 15th and 16th century is and should invariably be a fortress in order to exclude those who do not comply with urban ideals. According to David Theo Goldberg, the European city of the early Renaissance is imagined and desired as a fortress, self-contained, delimited and limiting, restrictive and ruled over, ultimately by a single authority. So this desire materialized in its purest form, as you probably have already guessed, in city-states, which were invariably surrounded by walls. So very much in the spirit of Thomas More's exclusive and superior society, Utopia, city-states in Renaissance Europe were impermeable to foreigners, to those who were different, and by virtue of this different, less civilized, and therefore morally inferior. So And yet the passage from city-states to nation-states has implied what Minsky calls a process of defortification. The permeability of their borders, of the city-states borders, became a necessity once nation-state became to appear, especially after the Westphalia treaties of 1648. But why? What caused this passage? What happened for those desired ideal urban settlement to lose their most important features, their walls? It must have been something dramatically important, something that changed the very notion of the city, hence the very notion of society. As we have seen, city was a proxy for society. As you may have guessed, what I'm hinting at is colonial trade. Long-distance trade with the then called Indies, today's Caribbean islands, was an unprecedented source of wealth for powerful Western European rulers. What colonialism brought to Western Europe was therefore not only colonial-based wealth, but a new conception of urbanity. A city not as a fortress any longer, and as the city was understood as a proxy of society, colonialism also brought to Western Europe a renewed conception of society. What does this mean, and what was this conception predicated upon? How did it look like? This is the core and big question I was asking earlier on. So I would just like to mention what I believe is a very important clue, something which happened in the mid-16th century and in the context in which it happened. So as Sylvia Wynter states in her 2003 seminal essay, Unsettling the Coloniality of Being, Power, Truth, Freedom, in the mid-16th century, a crucial debate occurred in Valladolid in Spain. The debate saw two clergymen, Las Casas and Sepulveda, discussing whether the so-called Indians of the New World, today's the Caribbean and Mexico, had a soul or not, and therefore whether they could be exploited as slaves and killed if not apt to work. To simplify a little bit, Las Casas, one of these two clergymen, held that yes, Indians had soul and therefore could not be killed, while Sepulveda, the other clergyman, argued the opposite. The latter eventually won the debate, so Indians were told not to have a soul and therefore they could be enslaved and killed. And what is important to understand here is Sylvia Wynter's comment on the reason why this happened. According to Sylvia Wynter, the reason why Indians were considered to be soulless and therefore exploitable and enslaved was the existential, social, political, and commercial on-the-ground processes that were to lead to the rapid rise of the centralizing state, to its replacement of a system ensemble with its monarchical own, and to the expanding mercantilism with its extra-European territorial conquest, exponentially accelerated, was soon to triumph and become the accepted doctrine of the times. So the reason why Indians are considered to be soulless and therefore exploitable is the so-called raison d'etat, the reason of the state, is because the state has to accumulate wealth, the state has to accumulate power, that Indians have to be considered exploitable and their labor force, therefore, exploited so that the wealth of the Spanish crown that was to be soon become a nation state could increase. So that is Sylvia Wynter's reading of the Sepulveda's reason for this position. That is to say, the modern state imperative of production and accumulation of wealth was the guiding ethical and political principle that defined who was and who was not a human being. Soulless at that time, not having a soul, was equal to not being fully human. Okay, so being a slave, being a possession of someone else, because your humanity is being erased and absolutely unacknowledged. And that is why, for example, Frantz Fanon, when he talks about rationalization, he means by that dehumanization. Okay, so and that was the condition of enslaved populations all across the over 2 centuries of slave trade. And I wanted just to mention that this conception of humanity that starts in the mid 16th century was at the core of liberal philosophies of the state. For example, John Locke's 2 Treatises of Government. When John Locke refers to the mythical state of nature, as Lisa Lowen suggests in her seminal book, 2015, The Intimacies of 4 Continents, John Locke alludes to the settling of the New World of the Americas. So the Americas were considered the tabula rasa, the sort of the place of nature as opposed to the place of culture, which was Europe. And so, but this was laying at the core of liberal theories of the state that still permeates our conception of the state and our acceptance of state power. Race, as Lowe continues, was determinant in setting the boundaries of liberalism between us Europeans and Indian, Black, Negro, Chinese, Coolie, and so on. So the last part of this talk is about contemporary Europe. I just outlined the relations between new conceptions of cities and new conceptions of humanity. And these two conceptions, these relations were very tight in Renaissance Europe. But my question now is, where has this history gone? So what are we, scholars in the 21st century, doing of what had happened in the Renaissance, of that new beginning, so to say, of imagining, representing, and then acting upon materially this new conception of urbanity and humanity that went hand in hand? If European cities have become modern, along with modern conception of humanity, which included the essential difference between slaves, less than humans, and freemen, humans, between uncivilized and civilized, between savages and educated, how are the histories and social theories of Western European cities today being told? The short answer is, contemporary social theories and histories of European cities never mention race. They never mention the constitutive, both material and representational, reference for dominant views of human distinctions, of material domination and exploitation that systematically and systemically occur in 21st century European cities. These are just some of the most influential social theory books of European cities, on European cities. They primarily draw on Weber's classic The City, published in 1922, and primarily talk about the organization and functions of welfare states in shaping social cohesion and development. Again, two tropes related to the idea of modernity that I was talking about at the beginning. These studies lack, quite strikingly, any reference to race and racism as rooted in the very conception of Western European cities, and by extension, Western European states, and by extension, global capitalism. Even studies of segregation, which one may think, okay, here, how can you ignore race? You know, you do a study of urban segregation, how can you ignore race? Even studies of segregation, race is ignored and replaced by the more palatable ethnicity. This is just an example of a recent book on very publicly, very well received book, Paradoxes of Segregation by Sonia Arbaci in 2019, when the author takes the case of the four Southern European cities, Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Greece, and very casually states in page 59, both ethnicity and race are socially constructed concepts and quite contentious. The former is more predominant in Europe, while the latter is preferred in Northern America and the Second World, South Africa and Latin America, and does not engage critically with this accepted statement or this conventional wisdom. And so this is it's not the choice of the author to use ethnicity instead of race in the book, but it's just a passive acceptance of what is a rooted conventional wisdom in European studies, in studies of Europe and of European cities. But then at the end of the book, the author does acknowledge that there are colonial legacies, okay, in Europe, and so here so it's a bit of puzzle here. I'm a bit puzzled. So if race was the dominant form of distinguishing humanity during colonialism, colonial legacies that shape European cities today have nothing to do with race, but we can only talk about ethnicity. So what is here at stake? And my point, and my co-author, my co-editor Noah Ha's point in our forthcoming book is precisely that these authors just simply do not engage critically with the categories that they inherited from people who were just basically celebrating modernity and European cities as the pinnacles of modernity and civilization. And this is a legacy of the Renaissance. This is a legacy of Renaissance urbanism and the ideal city that I just. And instead, evidence of the presence of race in organizing European cities is striking. These are just figures of stop and search statistics of in European countries. England, Wales, blacks are exponentially more highly stopped and searched by police than non-blacks. In France, sub-Saharan Africans are more, 50% more stopped than the majority. But what I want to mention, especially here, is this year, the Fundamental Rights Agency of the European Union published an enormously wonderful study of stop and search by police that distinguishes between stopping and search while in a vehicle where your skin color is less visible and stop and search while on foot. And you can see here striking evidence of racial profiling, basically, by the police. Take, for example, France, where stopped while in a vehicle, while on foot for South-Saharan countries from Sub-Saharan Africa is over 1.5. It's over 2 times more than the average stop and search figures. So 18 is the average, 43 is Sub-Saharan African. But you can see similar, strikingly proportions in all the other countries. And the important thing here about cities is that if you look at the bottom right side, big city and town or small city figure prominently in the location where this stop and search were carried out, as opposed to country village. So I leave this here. Here I have other examples that I wanted to show, but perhaps we can discuss them in the brief discussion of contemporary relevance of race in organizing European cities. This is a festival taking place every year in Amsterdam, which is celebrating Zwarte Piet, which in the folk tales of Dutch folk tales is the servant of Santa Claus, and high amount of people, white people in the Netherlands, they paint their face in black as a sort of joke and celebration of, together a joke and a celebration. This is the interesting ambiguity and ambivalence of Zwarte Piet. Here is the 2015 so-called European migration crisis, where people from the Middle East and Northern African countries were seeking asylum, seeking refuge in European cities. This is Keleti Station and Budapest, for example. This is the decades-long fight by Black activists in Berlin to change street names in Berlin from previous colonial generals and racially offensive street names to names of Black and brown poets, literary scholars, and other Black and brown people. Here's in 2017 eviction of Eritrean people seeking asylum in Rome, a very violent eviction by the police with no apparent reason because that building is completely empty. So I want to finally stop here by inviting you to intervene with your questions and to open up for discussion, basically. And I just want to throw out these questions for discussion. Can race be considered absent in Western Europe? Why do you think is race tabooed in studies of European cities in this case? And who is benefiting from tabooing race or keeping it tabooed? If anybody is benefiting, I don't know. Well, I have my ideas, but I want to listen, hear from you. And how and where should we start conversations on race in Europe in order to, in the spirit of the importance of critical race theory and what are the sides where conversations of race you think would be more effective, the best sides to start and continue conversation of race. So I hope I kept within time and I would stop sharing and maybe we can start for the discussion, Gary.
Thank you, Giovanni. That was, for me, extremely interesting, and I'm going to struggle to restrain myself from posing about 25 questions. Maybe I'll ask you them later. I like the fact that you put those questions to the group at the end. So now is time for people either to respond to Giovanni's questions or to ask questions of your own. I see 2 hands up. Okay, I see 2 hands up, but now they're down. Jalila, did you have your hand up?
No.
No? Does anybody have their hand up? Manuel, did you have your hand up?
No, this was applause.
That was applause.
Both of it was applause.
Okay, all right. So are there any hands up right now? Any questions that should be asked that you wish to ask? Any responses you want to make to the questions that Giovanni asked you? Yes, Dinara.
Hello, thank you for a wonderful lecture. It was very, very interesting and important. Talking about your questions that you posed at the end, living in the UK, in Scotland, I have been doing a little bit of research on my own, just asking people who come from the United Kingdom about what kind of education they are receiving in schools about colonialism and the history of their countries. And it strikes me how little people learn about it. And sort of, again, this is just me comparing my experience living in America and now in the United Kingdom. I think that I did not expect how little people are being taught in schools about the colonial past here. And whom does it, I wouldn't answer the second question is who benefits from that, but I think you can feel it while being in the society that these topics are tabooed and they're not being brought up. And when you bring it up in common conversations with friends or acquaintances, there's an awkward pause and people just don't have the language to speak about it. And that's something that strikes me, that there is no vocabulary for general public to vocalize it. And I think that bringing these topics up in education and in general conversations, it's something crucial for the situation to change. Yeah, that was my comment.
Thank you.
And thank you again. Thank you very much for this lecture.
Thank you very much for your question. Can I answer it now, Gary?
Well, let's, my questions are always a default when there is silence, and you know how much I hate silence. Any other questions? Luba.
Not a question, I guess, but more of a comment in relation to what Dinara said about the UK. There is, I'm sure you would know Jane Elliott, right? And Jane Elliott had this anti-racism exercise that she did in the US, and then she repeated in the UK. And if you watch two of them back together, it's actually available on YouTube. It's called Blue Eyes, Brown Eyes. It's Jane Elliott. And if you watch them back together, you can see how different is the behavior of people in the UK towards being told that they're racist, and just towards the idea of racism. They are so like in denial in comparison to the US folk, even though like obviously there's difference in terms of like the one in the US, the experiment, it was with younger folk, and in the UK it was older people. But then it's even more striking that in the UK it's older people who deny being racist, deny racism is something that really exists in the UK and whatnot. So it's just very interesting thing that maybe people would want to look up on YouTube and watch.
Can I ask you to post the link if you can, so that
yeah, I can try and find it right now.
you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Other hands up. Sergey, do you want to say publicly what you posted? Sergey from Moscow. Okay. Any others?
If I can jump in on Sergey's point,
Okay.
I appreciate. I think the word trauma is I mean, has several connotations, including psychoanalytical ones. So we should be a bit careful about using it like casually, maybe in discussions on cultural history and so on. But it has I think currency as well in these conversations. And I would like just to point to Grada Quilomba's book Plantation Memories, in which chapter 1, Memories. The book is from 2006, and Grada Quilomba very eloquently shows that there are 5 stages of coming out of taking responsibility for white people of what happened during colonialism and for racism that is being is going on like in everyday life. So there are 5 stages, and because the book combines cultural theory with psychology, I think it's a precious source for understanding that yes, we can talk about trauma when we talk about colonialism as long as we work for emancipating from this trauma, which means erasing racism. Okay, erasing racism, really erasing, not only fighting racism, but erasing racism. So this is the final point. We shouldn't simply be happy about fighting racism and be proud of it. That's, again, reinstating our whiteness. But the goal should be unequivocally getting rid of it, like radically. And there are some proposals, including concrete proposal. For example, I'm thinking about Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who's talking about abolition and abolitionism as a sort of thinking about the prison as a proxy for what race does. Okay, race encapsulates, race contains, race tames, and so there are concrete proposals about how to erase racism, and so we should. The challenge is to work towards them rather than being happy about how anti-racist we are or how non-racist we are. So yeah, I agree with trauma, but let's get over it with concrete steps.
Okay, Alex. Sabine. Let me see. Alex said, this is an interesting sociological perspective on trauma, social theory by Jeffrey Alexander. Those of us who aren't sociologists, you want to summarize briefly what it is? Either of you. As opposed to, okay, well, everybody can read what he says.
Central to Alexander's thesis is the notion of loss. When, for example, people go through processes of losing their language or go through process of losing their symbolic and cultural references, they go through something that can resemble trauma. And so this is the cultural trauma that Jeffrey Alexander is a cultural sociologist, so he places a very big accent on culture. So that's more or less what he's trying to say. And I think that's a very good suggestion. Thanks, Alex.
Anyone else? Anna Sidona.
Hello, I want to mention the last one question from where we could start our fighting with racism. And I think it's simple with yourself. So when I had an experience to live in Africa, in Morocco, and I'm common with Jewish culture as well, and I know a lot of Cuban people who live in St. Petersburg here in Russia, and so I'm kind of familiar with this situation, and I was in this situation as well when I lived in Morocco. So I was the less meaning person. And I think that it is like we should learn the history. And moreover, I had a conversation with my student today about Africans. So I was surprised because I'm teaching Portuguese, and she said that our people in Africa and Brasilia, they don't want to do anything. So they are like that. And it's what we have nowadays in Russian, any country, just people we say normal or contemporary educated. So I mean, it's like we should begin with the education with stories, maybe.
Children's stories.
Yeah, exactly. Grandma stories, something like that. I don't see any other perspective, actually.
Thank you. And that goes back to Dinara's point about the lack of colonialism in education curricula in Europe and the UK included, actually. So absolutely, I agree with that. It's a very crucial site. And yourself as well. And again, Grada Quilomba's book, Plantation Memories, is a very good starting point, I think, for starting work on ourselves. Yeah.
Okay, Polly.
Yeah, this was a comment on the Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who Giovanni just mentioned. I think her first book was called The Golden Gulag. And of course it speaks to many of us here because she is, I think, asserting that the prison is an extension of the plantation system. And the title alone raises the question about what role prisons and prison colonies play in the Russian context. And Russia is at least part of it is Europe, if not all of it. So that's all.
Okay, well, I don't want to speak for Jalili because she's going to be giving her own talk, but this whole issue of mass incarceration and race, which is, again, is a major topic of conversation in this country, at least in certain quarters. I assume we'll take up on what you just said, Polly, and we can broaden it beyond. I mean, in the United States, it's absolutely acute. The percentage of the population that is incarcerated and the proportion of those people who are what in this country called people of color. It's just astonishing. So am I right, Jalili? Stay tuned.
Yes, stay tuned.
Okay. So there are more. It says Evgenia. Okay, so Evgenia Karachenko so is posting a comment saying, talking to many young people in Russia, I see complete denial of racism in Russia. So that is an interesting comment. Let me post a question, not the question I posed to you, which was an academic question, Giovanni, but a question that gets to something we mentioned in passing last week, and that is the intersection of the academic questions and political engagement, okay? Because the two are simply inextricable in the field that we're talking about in this forum. I don't see, it's unimaginable that we can separate the two, or that we would want to separate the two. And you stated that the goal is to eliminate it, to erase it, to emancipate ourselves from race and racism, okay? And when the question was raised, how do we do it? The answer was basically start with yourselves one at a time. And let me pose a question about that. I mean, all of this, in particular, the sort of prehistory of it or early history of it that you gave, starting from Renaissance, it's all about power and domination. It's all about structures. It's all about systemic relationships. Some people benefit from this. Other people are profoundly victimized by it. If it's really about structures of power, again, playing devil's advocate, how do you go about doing this without addressing the structures of power? And answer that in 10 seconds or less if you can.
Of course you do. Of course you have to address structural power. I think it's inevitable. I think I mean, we all know, especially those who are here know much better than me, that Lenin had an idea about how to do that, for example. And this was not about race, but it was about class. And to a certain extent, he succeeded. We can talk about here the extent, but there are examples in history where these things have happened. But I will also mention that to smaller scales, these challenging or even fighting structural power are possible. I mean, fighting capitalism was probably very hard in 1917, and it would be perhaps even harder today anywhere in the world. But there are examples in the world where capitalism has been tamed to a very large extent, and race and racism have been, reduced at least to kind of not so powerful currencies or occurrences. So we can learn from this, and then the other thing is civil rights movement, anti-apartheid movements, anti-colonial movements all across the 1960s and 1970s, that's where I think we can learn. And we can learn it from also comparing those movements and see what the logic was at stake back then to revitalize our anti-racist consciousness and actions. Black Lives Matter is doing this, I think, today. And it's not enough, of course, but it's something that is very, very
Okay. All right. Okay. I just
Sorry,
wanted
I could talk for ages. But...
Yeah, okay, I know I could. So I won't ask you then about what Piketty says about this, because that will have you talk for another several hours. Dina from St. Petersburg. Unmute yourself, please.
Yeah. Hi. I've been thinking about, well, challenging structures of power, and also about what Anna was talking about education. And I just wanted to say, I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment, a little bit of both. Some of you might know that recently my university, the St. Petersburg State University, stopped its connection with Bard College in the United States, and it was forced to do so because our government decided that that American college was, well, can't remember the exact phrase, but it posed danger to the constitutional basis of the country, and it was one of the our students went there and studied well, critical race and all kinds of subjects, and without that, I thought that our education is, I don't know where it's going, and it's really worrying me. And there's just one more quick thing that I wanted to add to this, is that unlike in America, and unlike in some European countries, the people who experience racism here in Russia often have nowhere to go to for support. Like, there's no real Black Lives Matter in Russia or something like that. Well, there are some human rights organizations, but they're not as influential. And labor migrants are often afraid to broach the subject of racism because, well, they're afraid of making it worse, I suppose. So well, generally, I agree that we need to include race, critical race in our curriculum, but I just can't imagine how to, given, well, what's happening to education in Russia at the moment. This is it.
Okay. Daria Kozlova.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm sorry I'm without video today. It's just I have technical problems, but I'm sorry about this. I just wanted to comment on what Giovanni said about learning from other countries and about kind of universalizing sort of the discourse, if I may say, because I got kind of the intention of universalizing, and I don't really think like it works, to be honest, because of course a lot of American activists like to use the word international in the American context, but unfortunately it doesn't work like that. And it's talking about like white supremacy, xenophobia, and racism in Russia and America, they're incomparable because of the scale and because of the again, power structures. Because I think there was a question about like how the prisons in Russia are influenced by the problem of xenophobia and racism. Of course, they influence because I can even send like the conference kind of transcript about the racial profiling in Russia, because that's a big thing. Because actually how people respond when they react to some crimes happening in like in the regions or in Moscow, and how many crimes migrants, for instance, actually committing, it's completely different like numbers. And we see this every day. And like, there's no integration, because I work with migrants. I've been working with migrants for at least 3 years, and I know how hard for them it is to actually, integrate into the society because of the closeness and because of the xenophobia. Because I think it's like the primary sort of problem that I see every day, and unfortunately. But yeah, I'm not sure about universalization in this case, because it also reminds me, I'm not sure that like, I remember the picture I saw after the protests of this year in Russia. I saw the meme, a tweet. I'm not sure I can find it, but this was like, like a tweet on the American on American Twitter, like the picture of protesters throwing snowballs into the police. Maybe you saw this video, like they just getting snowballed, literally. And some of the commenters kind of commented, like, why the police like doesn't respond? And the comment was, because the protesters are white. But I mean, it's sure the thing maybe again in the Western countries, but it is completely different context in Russia, for instance, completely different context. And like the universalization can be harmful to your knowledge of the situation, for instance, I think. Sorry about the long comment, but yeah.
Okay. We have time for maybe one more. It's getting close to 3. Is there anybody who hasn't said something that wants to say something? Okay, so
I think
Lydia, okay.
Again, thank you for the talk. It was great to hear. I just tried to compose my kind of question / just news. The thing is that in my city, it is planned to completely destroy and remove, how to say it, the area where Roma people live. So basically, it used to be a no-go zone for like 20 years, and it wasn't really worked with. So it just stayed how it appeared in the 90s. So nothing has changed. And right now, our city government, is planning on just destroying it to build new apartment blocks. And this is my personal opinion, pretty low quality apartments. So basically like 20 stores on a little part of land. And the issue is that, how I said before, this area gets completely destroyed. And so like around thousands of people have nowhere to stay, and they're not integrated, absolutely. And my question was, and also there are a lot of people who are in support of such policy. My question was, is there any adequate way in which this problem can be managed, maybe in experience of other countries or cities? Because what's happening is that basically crime is probably going to go up, because we live a lot of people with no social prospects. And how could this have been prevented if there are any options, if there could have been?
So Giovanni, you've got to answer all of those questions.
Sorry.
No, those are good questions. Let me just interject. This
In 5 minutes.
The discussion today has been really good. It's exactly what we wanted. And John said we're going to continue it on some.
Well, so
what it is you're going
yeah,
to do.
in connection, I think there are a couple of people who just maybe want to make a final comment. We should really end by the top of the hour. But we will, so in conjunction with the certificate program that we announced at the beginning, we will create a space. That's what I think that's a technical term, a space within the NYI social, which is our social media site created by Omer Preminger. We'll create a space for this particular discussion. So continuation of this discussion, maybe people can put the references to the books that they mentioned, to the clips that they mentioned. Maybe Giovanni would share his slides with us there. Maybe if you have a written text for part of your talk, you would share that with us there and that kind of thing. And it would be a place where people can just comment and continue these discussions, because there's much more to be said here than we have time for. So we will create that space and let everybody know about it. And please encourage everybody to participate, to keep the discussion going there.
Yeah,
that's all I wanted to say now. And Gary, you can take it to the end from there.
Okay, well, Anya put a thumbs up and then she took it down immediately. I just wanted to say let the record show that Anya put her thumb up and Giovanni put his thumb up. So, okay, we have, according to my clock, we have 2 more minutes to go until 3. I have to get off at 3, John. So if people want to continue.
No, we should end at 3. Let's end at 3. So we have, on my clock, there's almost 4 minutes.
Okay. Well, all right.
So maybe a couple final comments or something.
Okay. So, all right, Dinara.
Yeah, just a quick comment to continue on what was being said about Russia and the race discussion there, or the absence of the race discussion. I follow an account of a progressive school for children in St. Petersburg, and recently I encountered a post where they use a controversial, for me at least, phrase, and it's a literal translation, an uninvited guest is better than a Tatar. Незваный гость хуже татарина. And it's a school for children, and they're introducing their friend organization. They're saying that this organization is always welcomed and they're always better than a Tatar. And I couldn't resist, and I commented and I said that I find it offensive, especially in the context of a school for children. 9 people reproached me and 3 of them were Tatar, and I'm Tatar myself. So what I was surprised is how polarized we are, and how there's a lack of discussion. And I was told that don't be so touchy, don't be so vulnerable. There's no need to be like that. It's just an old expression from the old times. So just wanted to, I've been thinking about it a lot. Am I actually too touchy to feel like that? So so I think Russia is an interesting case, and we have a lot of homework to do on that topic as well.
Yeah, I think a point that Giovanni is making, and one of the implications of the type of research he's doing, is that there's lots of special cases. That is, we're talking about something that in a multiplicity of iterations, a multiplicity of forms, is enormously widespread. I mean, it's easy for me to say that in this country because it is so embedded in everyday life. But yeah, okay. Anna Shidova, you get the.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that this problem is not beginning with the race. I think it's beginning with I am and the other. So that's why I mentioned children education. So it's not because actually race is what we see. We can see that you have brown hair, you have brown eyes, or you have white hair or blue eyes, or you have like other hair or other eyes. Doesn't matter. So this problem is beginning with the individualization of the personality. So that's why I think that the resolution must begin with the children. So that's what I wanted to mention. Just that.
Okay, so John, maybe we should have a collective project for everybody who tunes in. By the end of V-NYI, we collectively come up with a series of solutions to this problem. You think that's feasible?
The entire world, right? For all of the countries that we're represented by our students,
Absolutely.
which is a lot of places. Sure, no problem. You know.
Okay, look, it's 3 according to my clock. Thank you, Giovanni. This was a really good presentation, and it generated precisely the kind of response that these things need to. Well done. Thank you, people who attended. You asked really interesting questions. See you
Thank
all.
you all, and see you all on Thursday for the next session.